It's a red flag if couples fight all the time. But if a couple never fights at all, even slightly, well, that flag is at least yellow.
The one weird thing that triggered it all for me was, wow, I never fought with that girlfriend. Never got into a fight. Verbal fight. Never really disagreed with her. That is odd, though. I think that's odd. I mean, I guess that's me. Isn't that a part of me? And I needed someone to say, no, like that's not normal. And I was like, huh, really? And, and I didn't really believe it. I thought it was a good part of who I am. I don't get angry. I don't lose my temper. And that started a journey.
Welcome to In This Family, presented by Nexus Family Healing. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray, President and CEO. Paul Scheer is an actor you have probably seen on TV. He was a regular on shows like The League and Black Monday, recurring roles on 30 Rock, Veep, and Fresh Off the Boat. He's also the co-host of the podcast, How Did This Get Made? All about not-so-great movies. Paul's wife, actress June Diane Raphael, is a co-host on that show as well, along with actor Jason Mantzoukas. Over the years, Paul would often tell stories from his childhood on that show that he thought were funny, only to find June and Jason looking at him with some concern. Like, that doesn't sound normal or healthy, let alone funny. Paul started really digging into his past for some answers. This led Paul to write a New York Times best-selling memoir, Joyful Recollections of Trauma, where he dug into childhood memories of abuse at the hands of his stepfather, who also abused Paul's mom. Paul's perspective on trauma is a little different than you might expect, more complicated. When I spoke with Paul, he had some great insight on discovering how trauma affects you in the long term and how to move forward to a healthier future. Welcome to the show, Paul Scheer. It's great to have you.
Excited to be here. I'm a fan, so this is going to be, I hope, a really interesting conversation. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say that. Hope, if your audience is listening, I'm going to say I guarantee it. It's going to be a good, good conversation.
The different things we talk about on this show are mental health, but trauma as well. And I want to talk about some of the trauma that you experienced. But if we could start by explaining who your parents were.
Yeah, I think first I'll even lead by just saying, there's a real stigma around the word trauma, I think. Because, the way that I look at trauma is it is the fire in which we are all born. Whether that is the coach who tells you that you'll never, play professional basketball, whether it's, I ran out of examples right away. But you know what I'm saying? It's like we all have these issues that we're overcoming. So I feel like trauma is something that we all have different levels of, so it's a term that I always feel like I have to not talk around, but also show the similarity, because I think that some people will sometimes cordon people off, like, well, I don't have trauma. And I think for a long time, that was a big issue for me, not feeling like my trauma was important enough to even discuss, at least publicly, right? Because so many other people have it worse, or so many other people, you're more deserving of that attention, so I really appreciate you having that kind of open conversation. But I also think part of the title of my book, Joyful Recollections of Trauma, I think is to destigmatize that word, because it is something that we can all embrace. We've all had it.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate what you said there, and I fully agree, and I'm really glad that you put that context around it, because it is really important for people to understand that there's not a criteria of having something a challenge that we faced in our life that we need to overcome that might be impacting the way we live our life.
My big takeaway from writing or being open about my life has been really that ability that, sharing. I may not have lived your life, but I can see similarities in situations that you've been in, right? It doesn't have to be exactly the same. And I feel like that's the reason why we should all be talking and we should all be sharing. And we shouldn't limit ourselves by this other societal way of looking at things. That's not, only a handful of us probably were handcuffed to a bed and kept in a basement for 20 years, right? But it doesn't mean that, other stories can't be told as well. My background, my upbringing was fairly generic. My dad was a pharmacist. My mom was a nurse who worked in a emergency room, and they got married very, very young, and they had me when they were very, very young. And I would say about 3 years into my life, they decided to get a divorce. And one of the things that I remember, like early memories, really are triggered around this idea of like being in the house with my parents, but knowing something was a little bit off, right? There was one night that I woke up and I caught, not even caught, I just found my dad sleeping in the guest room, right? And that was abnormal, right? That was something, it was odd. And then again, it happened. And I asked my mom, I was like, well, what's going on? Why aren't you guys sleeping in the same bedroom? And my mom's like, oh, our bed is broken, which, by the way, is a beautiful metaphor for divorce. But I knew something was a little bit amiss. I found out that my parents were in the process of getting divorced, but they didn't want to upset my childhood. So they lived together for 2 more years. So
Wow.
until I was about 5 years old. And that started off with my dad kind of being in different bedrooms to then my dad not even living in the house, but commuting, leaving after I've gone to bed, coming before I've woken up, right? I remember that every time I would get up from the morning, my dad would be in the kitchen, right? I didn't, and while they were really wonderful at kind of creating this illusion, there was a part of me that just knew something was odd. So much so that the memory of that is so much clearer to me than my mom and dad telling me that they were going to get a divorce. Like that didn't hit as hard because I think in a weird way, it gave me a resolution to like the weirdness that was happening. And again, this is me talking as an older person going, I guess that's what I was going through, but I don't remember. That's not a traumatic moment. My parents telling me they were getting a divorce. As a matter of fact, I think in many ways, they slow played everything. They made it so gentle that I don't even know if I really put together divorce. It was like, oh, we're going to be living in different spots. And what does that mean? And they made it very natural. And I would say that one of the extreme benefits of having my parents and the way that they did this was it was very kind. I think it was also very confusing. And they were doing their best, the best with the tools that they had. They had to get their marriage annulled. Catholics, it was like, we have to make sure that, this is wiped from the record. It didn't even exist. And that's kind of how it felt for me. Like this was like kind of a do-over, a change. And I was the remnant of that. So that's really the base level right there of my 2 parents.
So then, okay, so that is really helpful to have that context. And so then let's talk about your stepdad.
Yeah. Well, so my stepdad came into the picture 6 to 8 months after we left the family home. My mom had moved into a new house, and my mom was a nurse, and she took up some part-time care for an elderly woman in the neighborhood, actually our next door neighbor. And our next door neighbor had a son. And that son was the person that my mom started dating. And that man was incredibly different than my dad. My dad is a pharmacist, came from very sweet parents in Connecticut. They were farmers. It was very, very gentle. Like I probably could count on my hand until this very moment how many times I've heard my dad yell, if any, right? So it was a very different thing. Whereas this new man that she met was a truck driver for a supermarket chain. And he was a little bit more rough and tumble, a cowboy hat wearing, knife on the belt, collect guns out, very ultra masculine, right? It was a very different thing. And he was a man who could be incredibly kind and gregarious, but more often than not, he also had this dark side to him, a side that was really shocking, almost to the point of he would make these moves, physical moves, verbal moves, that you're like, did that just happen? Right? Like, because life would it would like the record skipped and then we were back in the song, right? And that really came out in physical abuse to me and my mom. I'm an only child. There were just these moments where, as a child, it felt normal. And this is like, I've always tried to wrestle with this. It didn't feel like I was being abused because it almost felt like he was playing on my level. It was like I had a really sadistic older brother. And I do think that part of that, and again, it's me looking at abuse. I don't know what abuse is because I'm just living it. It's like, oh, well, I guess when he gets mad at me, he's going to take off his belt and hit me with it. My dad never did that, but that's how he does things. But my dad doesn't wear cowboy boots either. And it would start with, oh, well, we'll wrestle. But the wrestling would evolve into a place where it would the choking was involved, or a pulling of a muscle, or a twisting of an arm that got past the point of like playful wrestling. It got into the point of like panic that I was going to get hurt, right? So those things, like, they start to feed in very naturally, right? And so it would start off playful, then it would get scary, then it would get dangerous. And then you didn't know what you were going to get, because it was one thing for him to do it to me, and then there was one thing for him to do it to my mom. I think when I saw it with my mom and this physical abuse to my mom, that was a moment of being like, oh, it's not just me. Again, don't know how to label it, don't have the tools to label it, just living through it. And then it was watching and waiting. And I don't have an alcoholic parent, but I think when I talk about this, I think about it like having an alcoholic parent. Like, I didn't know what I was going to get. How was he going to come home? What was going to be the moment? And, this is a man who would come home with a black eye, or come home with his arm in a sling. Oh, what happened? Oh, he fell off a pallet. And what we found out later on is like, well, he was getting into fistfights at work. Right? He's that kind of guy. I think the fact that he had guns made it even more scary, and yes. It would be a person who would give me guns to then kind of mishandle. Like, you give an 8-year-old a shotgun and you don't really properly tell them how that kick is going to go, right? So it was, and you get thrown back, or it hits you and you get a bruise, and then he would come in to remedy that. So he would almost set up situations. Now, I do think the biggest telltale sign that something was off from the get-go is that he wouldn't let me call him by his name. I had to call him Dad. So I'm like, okay, I guess I have to call this man Dad. He's my dad. And it wasn't stepdad, it was Dad. And he wouldn't respond if I didn't call him Dad. So again, I think my mom is trying to, and I try very hard, and this is going to be a tricky process for me here, because I try not to tell my mom's story. It's not my story to tell, her story to tell. I can't get into her head. But if I can just maybe give it this little bit of framing, I can understand from my mom's perspective getting a divorce in a time where that felt very, very wrong, that she couldn't or didn't want to admit that this might be another mistake. Didn't want to rock the boat. So whatever he requested, she tried to be amenable to. Like, we're going to make this work. We're going to make this work. And that was my life from second grade to seventh grade. In that time, I have to look at a calendar, but and those are really pivotal years,
really formative years.
Yeah, and in that time, it was always about, well, at first it was like, I don't want to upset him. Then it was like, well, maybe I can upset him. And then I have anger towards him. And then I have disrespect towards him. But I'm, again, just a child and fighting a 40-something-year-old man. So anytime that I would kind of fight back, I would have to then deal with the consequences being higher, right? So, for a long time, I really held this fact proudly, like, well, I did fight back. I have nothing to get over. I don't need to grieve this. I fought back. And while there's an element that that's true, it's also naive because I'm a child. I'm just kind, it's like I didn't actually grieve, and I thought like, well, just because had some, I had some ownership, or I was able to do certain things, I felt like I didn't have to address it, right? Like I dealt with it. And as we were going through this, and this is kind of maybe interesting and maybe relates to this conversation. What I found was even family members would start kind of peeling off. And as I've talked to more post the release of my book, some didn't know, some had an idea, but what I found was it's tricky to get involved in a relationship of the heart, right? People don't want to overstep, oversay anything. And my dad being the prime example of that, and I can talk about that in a second, but more the point of like my uncle and my grandmother and people like that, it's like, well, I don't want to say too much, and it's against the rules of what it is, and people would hide certain things. We definitely hid it really well. That like we could be in a screaming match in a car and then get out, and it would look like the perfect family. There was a moment where we reached a climax. I don't know exactly when this happened in the run or what caused this, but I called Child Protective Services on myself, and a neighbor, I guess, or somebody who had seen something had called Child Protective Services because they had seen me out in the street in my underwear, unable to get into my house. And I couldn't get into my house because I was locked out because this man wouldn't let me into the house, right? So Child Protective Services came and never interviewed me. And they interviewed my parents, or my mom and her husband together, right? So there was no even separation. So that always sticks out to me. And then at one point, we went to therapy. It was like, okay, well, this has to stop. And I think my mom took some stands in these moments. Like, well, this has to end. We have to do something different. And we went to therapy, and I told the therapist everything that I was going through, and in great detail. And she looked me in the eye and she said, I'm going to make you a promise. If this happens again, we're going to call in the authorities. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. We will not let this happen again. And then it happened again. And she was like, if it happens one more time, and so it felt like there was no escape. We had called everything. Therapy was not helping. No one was there to really help us. And so what happened was my mom, we were kind of forced to do it ourselves. My mom, well, I should really just say my mom. I'm a child. I'm not doing anything. And to get out of there. And I think once that happened, then there was a real fear of, we can never tell anybody that this happened because what will people think? And a majority of the stuff in my life was like, what will people think? So, just like the annulment where it was kind of erased from existence, then this entire marriage was erased from existence. We didn't talk about it. We didn't examine it. We didn't even tell people in our family about it. It was just gone. And I think that as I got older and older, I realized there was a huge section of my life I just would never talk about because it would raise more questions than it had answers. And, I realized was so much of our relationship to this abuse was a fear of what will other people think? What will other people say? We don't want to be those people.
You alluded to the idea that it's you're living your life and these things are happening. It's not like you're consciously like, okay, I'm being physically abused. You're living your life. It's happening. Were you aware when things were happening that, wait, I am being physically abused? Or was it just an incident and then a positive incident and then a negative incident? And
well, that's the way I kind of look at it. And it's because it happens all the time. It's a part of your life. And because you have no worldview, you haven't lived, and you can't say, oh, these are the first impressions of relationships, right? I didn't know, just thought it was different. Maybe it's different than this person, or maybe, I didn't have those tools. I didn't have those words. I had those feelings. He sometimes scares me. He sometimes is my friend. He sometimes plays too rough. I knew I didn't like certain things, but never in a million years. And it took me so long for me to even say it as an adult. Like, could I admit that I was abused. And I still hedge around it here because it's sort of like, well, but it wasn't the whole story. And that's the thing. And the book, I think, is about that. It's joyful recollections of trauma. I would agree. I would say that I had a very good, healthy, happy childhood that also had these really dark moments in it. They existed side by side. They were one. You couldn't really separate them. And also, the saddest part of it is once it becomes routine, you stop remembering all the details because your brain can only hold in the ones that are really bad or the ones that are really unique. Because it's like, well, I don't remember every sandwich I had either, right? Or every time we went out to go get ice cream. It's just like it was happening on a regular basis, so much so that you only remember the ones that scared you. And so I think that also is like an interesting game that your mind plays on you. I think as a parent now, I was obsessed with like, I have to do everything right. I have to do everything right. And what I realized, probably 1 or 2 years into being a parent was it's not about making a perfect day. It's about making like 5 perfect moments in a day, right? Or even 2. The moments are what we're collecting. It's not like everything has to be perfect. But in this relation, when you're in this other relationship, it's just sort of like, it's routine. It's just like, oh yeah, I come home and then that happens. Oh, right. And sometimes he may throw a pitchfork at me. Oh, and sometimes, right. It's just like, that's my life.
I'm going to say that in my view, there were a lot of adults around you when you were a child that let you down on this.
Yeah.
Now and I'm not saying that they don't have their reasons. They have their own lives, their own trauma.
Yeah.
What would you say? Because you have all these adults that are colluding with this secret of you being abused.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
you've got
different people in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. You've
absolutely.
got therapists colluding with it. You have parents that are colluding with it, step parents, grandparents, child protective.
Yeah.
Everybody's colluding. What would you say now to adults that are colluding with the secret of abuse?
The fear is, I guess, on some level, they'll cut me out. I think with my dad, and look, my dad did get physical. I watched a fist fight between my dad and this man. I think there's a lot of ways to be active, but the number one thing that I would do is go to the child, right? Because you may not want to go to CPS. You may not want to confront one of those parents. But what I think I felt and what I remember the most as a child was the people who listened, connected, and even if they didn't do anything. And there were these moments with, my uncle and my grandma, my dad, lent me their ear, gave me a thing, my stepsister even. And that was important. And I know that like, because I think probably the answer would be like, well, you do whatever you can to make it stop. And I don't know everyone's situation. No, nothing is black and white. But I think the most important thing is the welfare of the child. And you can do that in so many different ways. And you may not be able to stop it, but you can create a relationship, a bond, a place to alleviate some of that. My dad, as much as he was not actively stopping it or intervening, provided such an outlet for me because I got to go to his house every weekend. I got to go with, he took me out of it. And while I don't know how conscious that was or was not, I mean, it's just part of custody, that was huge.
What would you say to a child that is enduring the same experiences that you did right now?
If I could talk to a kid on that level, it's just share and find the people that you feel safe with and create a communication where if you are scared, I did have friends at a certain point where I could just go over to their house. Remember, I worked that out. If stuff gets bad, I can just scoot out of here. And that was good, right? So it's like it's finding those easy to use tools because you can't change people or force a change. You're not going to have that power. You just won't.
Can you talk a little bit about what it was like for you to watch the abuse from your stepdad to your mom? Not what she was thinking, but what you were experiencing.
Watching this man be abusive to my mother and my dad physically is something that it can shake you to your core because these are your parents. And there's a certain moment, you don't see your parents as flawed, right? You don't see your parents as people. You see them as protectors. And when the protectors can't protect, or you see the protectors being taken down, wait, my whole worldview is broken now, right? So I think that the way that I saw my mom and I go through it was we're in it together. We're like, yeah, it happens to me, it happens to her. And while it was like scary, it felt like, well, that's what we're in. We're in this thing. I knew that my mom knew what I was going through because she experienced it as well. But I think what we both didn't know was what we were both going through when the other wasn't there. This man worked nights, so I would come home from school and I would have a handful of hours with him. And then he would leave for work, and then my mom would come home, right? So there was spaces. There were moments where we were both isolated. I had to go away on the weekends. What would happen on the weekends? I didn't know, right? So a lot of the worst stuff happened under no one's eyes, but it was scary. But when it happened to my dad, it was shocking because I think there's a want of, well, I want this man to protect me, but I also want him to be safe. Like I don't want my dad to be hurt physically because that actually is more scary to me. Like I'd almost rather I never was like, oh, my dad was a coward. I was like, stay away because I know what I'm going through.
I'm curious, what was the moment in your life where the light bulb went off and you admitted to yourself, oh my gosh, I was physically abused?
I think what I've realized is it's all a slow build. Because at first it felt like I'm carrying a secret and I'm going to share this secret with someone. And I shared that secret with somebody who was when I was in college, I was in a serious relationship and I spoke about it, but not fully, but a little bit. And then, like another serious relationship, he explored a little bit more. And my wife, when I shared it with her, her reaction to it was really interesting. And I think that the interesting thing about talking about this stuff is you start telling a story and you can feel people tense, right? And then they go, okay, what can I do? How can I be? I want to take care of it. Oh, I wish I was there. And I always wanted to say, I don't need you to come in here and fix it. I'm just telling you this story. And then you start to feel like, well, now I'm catering to you because you're upset that I'm telling you something that's upsetting to me. And right, it becomes this thing where you're like, and then I'm like, maybe I won't tell you everything because you can't handle it. I've been through it. You don't know exactly what you need. I think that's why therapy is so important to a certain degree. And so I found myself wrestling with that. My wife had such a outsized reaction to it, but her outsized reaction, I think, finally let me embrace, right, okay, yeah, this is bigger than just, oh yeah, my stepdad did blank and my mom did blank and my dad did blank, right? It was like I would kind of start to see it there. That was like, now as I'm saying it to you, that was like the second step. The first step happened a couple years before that, which is when I was dating somebody else and we broke up and we went to couples therapy. We did that like that Hail Mary where it's like, well, we'll go to couples therapy and we can figure it out. Then maybe we'll stay together. And, we went to like 1 or 2 sessions and then my ex at that point was like, I'm done with this. I think it's over. And I was like, okay. And the therapist reached out to me and she's like, I wouldn't mind you staying. And I wasn't averse to therapy at all. I just was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And we started speaking about the relationship. And the relationship was a really interesting way in because it started to make me look at myself. Like, what are these habits that I have? And, we never fought in that relationship. I was very controlled with my anger. And I didn't want to upset the situation. I didn't want to like, where did that come from? And this therapist was like, well, I think you have a lot of anger. I'm like, I don't have anger. I can control my anger. And the way I was controlling my anger was just shutting it off completely. Right. And that was the first part of looking at myself through the eyes of a relationship. And probably that was the best way for me to get in there, because I was like, well, what did I do wrong in this relationship? I want to have a better relationship. I'm not looking at like dealing with my trauma. I just want to be a better person, right? Why did I not do this? Why did I do this? And that started to lead me down a path where I was like, oh, maybe some of this stuff is tied back to this. I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to be angry. My meter is so high. So when I would get angry, I would get angry. And not that I ever got physical, but I would get into a mode of preparing to be physical quick. And when I saw that, when I saw that coming out of me in high school, I was like, turn that off. People are scared when you do that. That's scary to people. But when I was a kid, it was not scary. It was just like surviving. It was living. So I was like, that's bad. People don't like that version of me. That's gone. Shut that off. And so I shut it off so much that I wasn't really fully myself. I wasn't expressing all the range of emotions, but it would pop out occasionally. I would get really mad at a stranger, a thing, a subway, whatever it was. And I realized like, oh, it's not like I can't have anger. It's like I just have to have levels of it. I could even get to that highest level of anger. It doesn't make it different, but it's like I couldn't just be like off on. Like I needed levels. I needed to figure out where I was. I could be, I can fend for myself. I can speak up for myself. So that first relationship started to give me eyes. Again, not looking at trauma, just looking at the effects of it, the ripple effects of that. And then when I was dating my now wife, her reaction really was about my parents and being mad at them. I was like, well, don't be mad at them. They didn't know. And, I was really, I never opened my eyes past this man, my stepfather. I never looked past, because I was like, well, he's the one responsible. He did it. It's not their fault. And I think that started to open me up, like, wait a second, where were they? But the real moment, it's when I was about to have a child and looking at that and going, oh boy, I'm afraid, because what if I know that kids are unpredictable and you're going to be stressed out. And what if I can't control my anger in that? What if I go back to that? And I was really scared about that. I was really scared that I would be this person, this abuser, and very quickly learned that, you have a kid and you're like, the most stressed I am, I'm never going to get to that point. And in that moment, that's when I really saw it for the first time. I was like, oh, got it. Because how could I ever do this to a child? How could I ever do it to my child? And more importantly, and this goes to my dad, how could I ever stand by knowing something was happening to my child? And I think the sum of those three moments really were, that was the process. Now, meanwhile, I'm going to therapy and through all this sort of stuff, but it was a slow reveal, of getting there, which I think in a weird way was really helpful to me, because it allowed me to take a one bite at a time.
I always think it's really important for people to be able to recognize that they have been a victim of something. They do need to be able to feel that and allow themselves to understand it and go through it. But we also know that staying in that mindset doesn't help people. They want to be able to come out of it, to own, to take back the power, the control in their lives. How have you been able to progress through sort of healing from this?
I mean, to paraphrase the great psychiatrist from What About Bob, baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. To me, it's about that first bite. What's something that you notice with yourself that is odd, that you want to change? Because you have to, that's part of it too. You got to want to change something. And I want to get to your victim part of this as well, but I didn't see myself as a victim. I saw myself as a survivor. I saw myself as somebody who, yeah, I went through that, but it's fine. I'm fine. I'm better than fine. As a matter of fact, I don't know why people sit around and complain about what they went through, because it's like, I don't need that. So I don't think that people are starting off even recognizing they're a victim. But I think you're like, well, what's that one weird thing? And I think the one weird thing that triggered it all for me was, wow, I never fought with that girlfriend. Never got into a fight. Verbal fight. Never really disagreed with her. That is odd, though. I think that's odd. I mean, I guess that's me. Isn't that a part of me? And I needed someone to say no. Like, that's not normal. And I was like, huh, really? And and I didn't really believe it. I thought it was a good part of who I am. I don't get angry. I don't lose my temper. And that started a journey that was a slow burn, and it's one that is constantly evolving. And so I think it's sort of like, if you can name that you were a victim, great. But I think all that stuff is in the past. What we're working for is the present.
Yeah.
Who are we now? Right? We're not going to go back there. We're not time traveling. We're not changing anything. But like, what are those ripple effects? And I look on my life, and I think what I've seen was, it is a ripple from this moment, like many things are. And that's when I talk about trauma as the fire in which we are forged. Yes, we were forged with this moment, and that moment affects us in so many ways. So, to me, it's like, well, what do you want to change in now? Like, to grieve the past, and this is maybe where I'm also still, like, I can grieve it, but I don't want to live in it. I can talk about it. I can use it. I can, people say, oh, is the book cathartic for you? I was like, no, it isn't, because the book isn't therapy. I did therapy. The book is a reflection on therapy.
It's really helpful to hear all of the ways that you've thought about this and internalized it, and kind of come to understand the past, but living in the present, and really just being where you're able to be now.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying it. I know sometimes I can get a little bit like caught up in my own like thought process, because it's hard to kind of articulate all these things succinctly, right?
Yeah.
But I think I just want to jump on what you said too, is like, the only thing we have is who we are right now, and the people that we interact with. And it may help you if you're in a relationship where there is a power dynamic and you want to adjust that. Like, again, abuse can come in many different forms.
Yeah.
And if you're in an abusive relationship, maybe you can change that.
Yeah.
You can, that could be, but you can't change the person. You can only change your response to it and the effects of it for you. And I think that freeing yourself up from that, trying to solve the larger thing, it is the worst path that you can be on, to make someone see what they did. You can explain it to them. And I've said this to my therapist a million times. I understand. I just have to understand how I can relate, and where I can make peace with myself in relation to other people. But I can't they can listen to me, and what they do with that, that's their own thing. And we can get so caught up with, well, they haven't changed. It's like, yeah, you got to change.
Yeah.
And if that means cutting that person out, fine.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a choice. It's an active choice.
That's right. So, Paul, how do you talk to your children about what happened to you, if at all?
It's interesting. My children are 9 and 11, and those are good ages for good conversations. I believe that they have a certain understanding of this, but I also don't bring them fully into it. I'm not like, people have asked me, have you let your kids read the book? Absolutely not. It is dedicated to them. It is there for them to read it when it is going to be appropriate for them to read it. But who I am is dad. Yeah. And I think if I tell them these stories, it's creating that same kind of fear. Like, oh my God, like I don't want them to be that scared of like, even like their emotional thing is, I've when we have talked about it, I can see them get really upset. Now, that being said, I haven't hid it. I will be honest with them. And this is the lesson I've heard early on from a friend, which is be truthful but succinct. And it's a good lesson for kids because I'm not lying. They know that something happened. I haven't gotten into every single detail. And it won't be a shock to them, that, oh my God, my dad never told me that. But I do think it's like, to what end am I telling them that? Like as I get older, it's a different ball game. We can have that conversation. But right now, they don't need to know that in the sense that, or in the detail that it is. So yeah, that's, my goal with my kids is to give them love, to show them and model for them, forgiveness and apologizing, and I can act in certain ways, and maybe there's a moment where I know for a fact I scared my son with how angry I got with him one time. I didn't touch him, I didn't do it, but I was mad. He'd messed up something really bad for his brother, and it really affected his brother, and that really was upsetting. And we can repair that moment too, right? I can say, and I didn't say anything. It's funny because it's like I'm putting it within the context of what we just talked about. It's nowhere near any of that, right? But it is like repairing that. Hey, I just want you to know I'm sorry for that. I didn't mean to be that level of whatever we were, whatever that specific is. And so that was something that was really never done. I said, that, it was glossed over. Oh, he didn't mean it. He didn't, that was this or that was it, right? It's not that. It's like, no, I made a mistake. That was bad. And I think when you make a mistake every now and then, you can forgive a person. When you are living in a world of doing that, that's when it's unacceptable. That's when it's a behavioral pattern, right? So long story short, it is something that I think if you ask them, they would know. I know they know, but I don't think that they know to what level or what detail. And I also do that in a certain way to protect their relationship with their grandparents. That's actually the most important thing too. It's like, I don't want to cloud their relationship with their grandparents. And that's a big part of what the book is me dealing with my own parents. So it's tricky, and so that is how I kind of look at that.
Where can folks find you?
You can find me anywhere on social media. It's just my name, Paul Scheer.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely to have you here.
Yeah, what a blast. Thank you so much.
If Paul's story really resonates with you, I highly recommend you read his book, Joyful Recollections of Trauma. Paul does a great job dealing with his physical abuse, and the things he teaches really hit home when you read the detailed version of his experiences. For instance, when Paul talked about being locked out of his house in his underwear, his stepdad had locked him out until Paul called him Dad. In This Family is presented by Nexus Family Healing, a national nonprofit mental health organization. You can learn more about Nexus and how to support our mission at nexusfamilyhealing.org. The show is produced by John Moe with music from Jeremy Messersmith. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate, and write a review. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray. See you next time.